All right. Greetings, everyone. Greetings and good afternoon. It is certainly a beautiful afternoon here in Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt. It is so great to see all of these beautiful faces today. My name is Chika Oduah, and I'll be guiding today's conversation. I am very, very excited about this event. This event is all about green and gender equal jobs. How do we ensure that gender equality is at the heart of the green transition? Also, why is it important to make sure that this happens? So these are some of the issues that we're going to explore. I have a lot of questions. I'm sure that you all have questions as well. So we're very fortunate to have a distinguished array of panelists here to help us think through some of these topics. I'd like to introduce them to you. We have Mr. Tadashi Matsumoto, and he is the head of the Sustainable Urban Development Unit at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. Then we have Montserrat, and she is a special advisor at the Just Transition Center at the International Trade Union Confederation. Thank you for joining us. We have Emanuela Pozzan. She is a senior gender equality and non-discrimination specialist at the ILO. Thank you so much for joining us. We also have Emil Kiær. He's the deputy DG of the Confederation of Danish Industry. And joining us virtually, just here on the screen, we have Emma Holten. She's a feminist activist and gender policy consultant. Can we welcome them all with an applause, please? Excellent. So I would like to kick things off with somewhat of a reflective question, if I may. So my first question to you all is, what draws your interest to this concern? Why are you interested in gender equality as it relates to the green job market? And also, what does green jobs mean to you? How do you interpret green jobs in the first place? So I'm going to challenge the panelists to capture their thoughts in just 2 minutes on this particular question, just 2 minutes. I'm going to start with Mr. Matsumoto. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. So I would like to start with this presenting the recent OECD work on green jobs in the local market. In terms of the definition, I like to stress that we have two approaches, one sectoral approach, one task approach. Task approach, we advocate task approach because task approach basically means you can capture green jobs in all different sectors, meaning not only solar energy sector, but green jobs can be found in, let's say, education sector, manufacturing sector, and other sectors. That creates a more dynamic transition to the green, to dynamic green transition. And of course, gender thing, I will come back later, but I'll stop.
Why are you interested in this topic particularly?
Well, my particular interest is really to advance the green transition, and then also this needs to happen from the job sector. That's my feeling, and for that we really need to make a real transition in every workforce, meaning genders or different sectors. So to advance green transition, we really need to address job market. That's why I'm interested.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Meir.
Interest as a woman and as a trade unionist starts early when I grew in a family with 3 girls and 1 boy, and I was educated in equality. But when you went out, the world was different. And when you go to study, the world is different. And when you take your first job, you are less paid, you are less considerate. And when I started to be trade unionist, one of my goals was to try to reduce this inequality. And of course, as a trade unionists that we advocate to fight against climate change, we see the green jobs as an opportunity and as a challenge. But at the same time, we see that we are doing the same mistakes like in other revolutions, that the best jobs, even in the green economy, are going to men. And despite the girls that you see outside fighting for climate and the people in the universities, a lot are women. And I must say that the constructors of the Paris Agreement, there is a large number of women. We see that at the table, when it's moment to decide the important policies that have an impact in our lives, the majority are men. And we are here, not only me as a woman, my colleagues, the International Trade Union, Confederation, to try to fight against those discriminations. And of course, the green jobs are a good opportunity, but always if they are accompanied by the social dimension, means green jobs must have social protection, must have equal access for men and women, and they must be well paid, because if not, we continue with this discrimination that the jobs that are female are the ones that are less paid, less considered, and less, I don't know, recognized by the society.
I can certainly hear the fire in your voice, so I appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
We're going to tap into some of that passion later in the conversation. Thank you for your thoughts. And Pozzan?
So thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation on behalf of the International Labour Organization. And for me, I really liked your two questions. The first one, I can tell you that I chose to be in this panel because I really like the concept note. You are trying to bring the conversation of just transition and green jobs to a new level, to a different level, that as International Labour Organization we really like, which means to go beyond the traditional understanding of what green jobs are, the traditional sectors that we are considering as green jobs, and in particular to also consider care jobs as green jobs. And so to your question, what do I mean for green jobs? Green jobs certainly are those jobs that protect the environment, but people are part of the environment, and the well-being of people is extremely important. And therefore, I see this very important connection between green jobs and the care economy, which is what makes us thrive and drive. And it's extremely important that women and men are part of just transition within the all different sectors that just transition is happening. So I hope there will be a chance to elaborate more after.
Absolutely. Yes, people are certainly part of the environment. Thank you for reminding us that. And Kiær, let's hear from you. What does green jobs mean to you? And why are you interested in this topic of gender equality?
Yes, I'm interested in this for many reasons, but here, I hope you can hear better than I can. But yeah, sorry. Yeah, but I'm representing a lot of companies in Denmark, and we actually believe that we have an immediate need for workers, for labor, at least in Denmark, but actually also all over Europe and the world. And in Denmark, we have calculated that we need more than 100,000 skilled workers to make the green transition. So if we don't recruit from half of the population, we really have a big problem. And what we see is that what we need actually is job in skilled workers to build wind farms and to district heating, and there's a lot of technical. It's a technical workforce, which is more minded to men today. So we actually have to make it more interesting for women to take these kind of jobs, and it's actually starting in kindergarten and in public schools and school system to make it more interesting for women to work in these kind of sectors. That's something we are working on with in the DI, and been doing that for a long time. So that's why we actually think it's really important that we recruit from the whole population, not just only half of it, to deal with the green transition. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And let's turn to our virtual panelist. Emma, what about you? Why are you interested in this topic?
Yeah, of course. Can you hear me all right if I speak like this?
Yes. If you can just keep talking, yeah.
Sure, great, perfect. So hi everyone. Like I said, my name is Emma Holten, and I work on feminist economics. And I'm very interested, and I think also some of the things that Emanuela was saying. And I think that when it comes to the green transition and to gender equality, actually women and natural resources have a shared kind of plight in our current economic system, in that the unpaid care and the value of unused natural resources are similarly devalued in current economic systems, which means that when there is a loss of care in our society and there's a loss of natural resources, we don't register it in the same way as when there's a loss of products, for example, or infrastructure. So I think what really tickles me kind of about the connection between gender equality and the green transition is that there are similar ways that women's labor has been taken for granted, that the resource of women's labor have been taken for granted, that makes them carry some of the burden that the green transition does as well. And I think that I'm also very in agreement with Emanuela that I think currently the most low status, most badly paid jobs are held by women, and that's care working jobs and kind of jobs that help sustain people. So right now, if we want a sustainable system, we actually need to up value not only in our culture, but also monetarily care work jobs, because many, many more people will need to have jobs about sustaining other people and sustaining our economy and sustaining human lives, basically, because it's something as amazing as an almost climate neutral service. So for men to, so DE, we're talking about getting more women into STEM and into the green transition jobs. I agree with that as well. But I think we also will need to look into a future where many, many more men will also be working with care work. And we also need to be able to visualize and count the value of care work, just as we need to be able to visualize and count the value of the loss of natural resources. So there are some kind of thematic similarities, but also some kind of future scenarios where gender and status is very, very relevant to how we solve these problems.
Excellent. Thank you for those points. This is a very good starting point. There's been a lot of talk about transitioning away from the fuel-based economy. And of course, many of us are familiar with fuel-based economies. And moving away from this, of course, is part of the strategy towards trying to solve the climate emergency that we find ourselves in, right? So now we actually just want to find out, if we move away from decarbonizing and moving towards decarbonizing economies, what does this look like? Because of course, moving towards decarbonized economies, it's quite costly, yes? And according to data from the ILO in 2018, we could lose about 6 million jobs as we moved away from fuel-based economies towards decarbonized, more climate-friendly economies. But also, this transition poses so many opportunities, right? According to ILO data, there could be 24 million jobs created. So we want to unpack some of this, and I actually want to talk back to find out from you, Emma, what does this look like? And in this green transition, how can we ensure that women in all their diversity are represented in this transition towards decarbonized economies?
I think there are kind of two feet we need to stand on to answer this question. I think the first part is about women's equal participation in democratic decision making. So how we shape these decisions about how to do it, how to transfer resources from one space to another. Right now, all over the world, women are underrepresented in democratic institutions, but also underrepresented in multilateral and bilateral institutions, in NGO leadership. Almost everywhere these decisions are being made, there are fewer women. And if you count Black and brown women, even fewer, trans women, even fewer. So we have a democratic problem where these decisions are being made in spaces where there are some people who lead very specific types of lives, often shaped by their gender and their race and their locality, often in the global north, which of course impacts the solutions that they're going to see and the solutions they find to be good. So we have a huge democratic issue with women's participation in decision making. The other foot that we're standing on here is women's equal participation and access to resources. So right now, this is also a distributory issue, right? How do we distribute the resources that we have, both in terms of money, but also in natural resources, in food? And right now, women have much less access to land, to money, to equal opportunities in terms of getting and having an income. So I think when we look at those two together, of course, they're kind of like a babushka. They're inside each other and they impact each other. But I think one of the things we need to look at is also what type of jobs do we want to carry our economies? How do we measure what a successful economy is? And that's where I think for many, many years, we've had an incredibly consumption and production-based economy that is incredibly based on the production of items and the selling of items, where I think we need to look into much more service-based economies and other things, other types of desires to drive the economy forward. And I think that's where we really need to look at the jobs that women currently have, that there is so much potential there to expand those types of jobs. Because right now, all over the world, women are leading much more sustainable lives than many men are, both because of travel but also because of the sectors they're in. So there's a huge potential there. And then of course, as DE also mentioned, you know, including women more in male-dominated spaces, especially STEM and technology, is a huge part of this, because we're getting solutions right now that are based on specific types of lives, specific classes of people who are blind to often, unfortunately, to the lived experiences of the people not in the room.
Mr. Kiær, you mentioned that in your region, you all are trying to bring women into certain sectors. Can you talk more about the strategies, the techniques, and also the language that you're employing to attract women to certain sectors of the labor market?
Yes, I can say a little bit about how we are working in Danish industry and also in Denmark. And I have to say that there are some prerequisites, some conditions that has to be there. And of course, some of them are a good system for kindergartens and stuff, to make sure that you have the prerequisite to actually be able to go to work. it's quite important. And maybe also to mention that in Denmark we have a very flexible system, so it's actually quite easy to hire and fire people. And I think it's a mistake if we conclude that we should be afraid of a change in the working force. In Denmark, we were really big in shipping industry 20-30 years ago. Now we are not that big in the shipping industry, but we're big in wind farming. So I think you have to accept a flexible, or you need a flexible labor market to make sure to make a transition. Otherwise, it would be like tiring up the system. So you need this flexibility. And then of course, maybe a last point, that when we're talking about solutions, that we have to really, it's a cultural thing also. So you really have to work on this from kindergarten to schools, to make sure that it is for everyone to work with STEM, science, technology, engineering. You have to. It's for everyone to work with in skilled working force, like plumbers or so you have to work on it in a cultural matter from the youth all the way up, because it's a way of thinking we're talking about here. It's very difficult. That's why it's very difficult. So it's not just a matter of how many women are we in management in a company. It's a much bigger and broader issue.
1, 2, 3. It's definitely holistic. What are some of the cultural hindrances, though, that are still holding you back from achieving this mission?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer, actually, because it's a tradition, it's a way of living for years and generations that we have to deal with in quite a fast matter of time. So it's really difficult, but it's traditions from generations, how we are born and how we are raised, and
Sure.
Sure.
I want to turn to Pozzan. Some of these traditions that are still holding us back, can you elaborate further? And from your view, which regions are making progress in trying to close this gender gap in the green labor market?
Well, I actually think that discrimination in the labor market remains one of the main issues. And for this reason, we see that, including in the Nordic countries, that are the countries certainly that are leading on gender equality, and from where we learn a lot, but you still have a relatively segregated labor market, with women being in some sectors more than others. You have also made massive efforts in having women, like in many other countries in the world, in having more women in STEM. But what is happening is that all those efforts are actually not giving the results and the impact that was expected. And one of the reasons is that we are trying to push women in gaining skills in sectors that are still designed by men and for men. So a lot of young women enter STEM-related sectors. They stay 1, 2, 3 years. First child comes, they don't come back to that sector. It's just too hard to keep up. And that's what and here I would like to connect to what you were saying, the importance of constantly training, retraining, long life learning is certainly what is needed at this point of massive change that is happening. And I want to connect as well back to the care economy, because the care economy is actually a sector that is not going to go through massive changes, because technology is certainly entering the care sector, but only to help where the human being cannot. So for instance, with robots that can lift people, but it's not necessarily going to change the human component that exists. I am not saying, and please do not get me wrong, I'm not saying that we want women to get into the care sector. But it is true that if we look at green jobs in a traditional way, you said it before, the ILO estimated 24 million jobs. But if we look at the care sector, according to the needs of societies, the care sector can generate 300 million jobs. How by 2035, if the right investments are made. And we're talking of a lot of investments. And in any case, climate change is going to push us to make huge investments. So here the point is, what is the fil rouge between gender equality, climate change, the labor market, and just transition? And it is unpaid care work, and it is paid care work. So either we get this connection, link, and we start to push for it. And I'm not just talking about care jobs. We want decent care jobs, because you all know, we have all seen it with COVID-19, that the care sector, 250 million people work in the care sector, the large majority women, heavily impacted by violence and harassment, heavily impacted by the gender pay gap, heavily impacted by discrimination, informal arrangements, occupational health and safety issues. This is not what we want for care jobs. And trust me, if the care sector becomes professionalized, valorized, well-paid, men will also start to come in. And if that happens, we have to make sure that, we don't replicate the same discrimination that happens normally in the global market, in the labor market. So I think this is, it's a matter of opportunities, it's a matter of choices, but we need to avoid having winners and losers in this just transition, which is something that the labor market has gone through before. So we need to learn and to make sure that we don't create new types of discrimination. Thank you.
Mir, I can see you're itching to speak at this point. Let's hear from you.
The same question.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yes, what I think that first we need to start to speak about inequalities, because it's the departure point. When we resolve inequalities that in certain areas, regions of the world are terrible, because here in our, let me to say, European bubble, well, we are in Egypt, but when we speak in our European bubble, we say it's necessary to create jobs, green jobs, quality jobs. But we must take into account, and we are here in the MENA regions, we are in a region that women are not allowed to have the property of the land, for example. And there is the case, and let me to explain one case, that a group of women in the region, I don't want to mention the country, received some funds or were elected or selected in a process for a project on green jobs, was in the agriculture sector. When the money arrived in the country, they were not allowed to receive the money. The money was direct, addressed to the husbands of family. They spend the money, and the women, they end in jail. 2 years ago.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't 50 years ago.
No,
it's just 2
no,
years
no,
ago.
no.
Okay.
That means in some countries in this region, women are not allowed to have their own life. Means that if they are not allowed, it's very difficult. Also because when we talk about care, there are a large majority in large part of the world that is unpaid care. That is another big problem because traditionally, we talk about tradition, women, mothers, grandmothers are the ones who care. But when we arrive to a certain professionalization, they are bad paid, temporary, especially in the tourist sector, temporary, seasonal, and they don't, each job is to start again. They don't have a continuity, they don't have social protection. And of course, care is important because society, demography shows that all of us, we will need carers. But if carers in 2 years will have a fantastic salary, fantastic working conditions, you will see that this female sector progressively will be a male, not dominated, but more balanced sector. That means it's a question of payment, it's a question, as I say, of recognition, but at the same time, care sector, as you say, there are the possibility to create 300 million. But in a lot of countries, in a lot of parts of the world, carers are low paid, low recognized. They suffer gender-based violence. That is another question because very often they work in the private domain, in a house or with people. They are alone. They don't have collective bargaining or they don't have the opportunity to have social dialogue because in many countries, including mine until some years, they were not recognized as workers. They were not included in the labor law. That means that they don't have the rights, unemployment benefits, maternity leave. They don't have anything of that. It means that we need to make progress, but I think that this COP shows the obstacles that we have because the gender action plan that came as important part of the Paris Agreement, as an important part of the just transition process that includes gender equality, is not making progress for one excuse or another. For money. It's not only about money. I understand that there are some countries that they need, but it's a question of political will because to sit in a table and to negotiate is not expensive. You need political will, the real interest to make progress on these inequalities, but the departure point is to change the inequalities in general. After you can go to reduce the gender inequality and gender pay gap, and after you can go to make progress on women in the best paid sectors like the new energy sectors, the new technologies are the ones that we will love very much to have female domination, but it's not the case at the moment.
You're talking a lot about the care economy in Pozzan as well. How do we make sure that the care economy is integrated into the green labor market, the green jobs market?
How is integrated? But the first is that if the workers that work in the care sector are recognized as workers, because if they are not recognized as workers and they don't have the capacity to negotiate good working conditions, we will never speak about green jobs because those are not green jobs. To have a green job is a job that is based on reduction of emissions, based on the recycle elements, all that, not use of chemical. But at the moment that you have a person that is not well paid, well recognized, and don't have the possibility to negotiate working conditions, we can never talk about, is what we say, the trade unions. We cannot speak about just transition if workers are not at the table. That is what
Absolutely.
we think.
Thank you so much. Mr. Matsumoto, you are an urban planning specialist. From your perspective, how can we close this gap, this gender gap that we're seeing? Certain sectors are obviously skewed, male overrepresentation in certain sectors. How can we actually tackle this from a city planning perspective?
Thanks a lot. So let me start with by showing some numbers from the report I mentioned, job creation and local economic development. subtitle is Going Green. Yeah? So this report, again, is going to be published next year. So I just like to show few numbers. So the very first thing, as I mentioned, green job is measured not by sector, but by tasks. So this is, first of all, already an important information. Second, by that measure, we found that green jobs are around 17% on average across all the other jobs. Among them, 72% of these green task jobs are held by men. Yeah, so 28 by women. So this is our estimate already showing this inequality. Now, green jobs are paid 20% more. Okay, so that's another thing. But now coming to the planning side, I'd like to emphasize that there are significant disparities within the same country about this green job distribution. So this is one of the hints that I like to stress, how to address this issue. So I took Sweden as a case. You know, I cannot give an exact number, but as a national average, Sweden has a 27% of green task jobs. So OECD average is 17%, but Sweden is doing well. 27% are green jobs, classified as green jobs. The top regions are Stockholm, 32%. The least regions we found is the Upper Norrland region, which has 21%. So within the same country, you have like more than 10% of difference between the distribution of green jobs. So this is the area that I like to stress. So if we really like to promote green jobs first, very important to advance the, top regions, but at the same time, we need a different strategy to look at a lagged region and then find a way tailored way how to advance green jobs in that region. In the same way, we can identify the gaps, gender gaps across regions, because you know the number, yeah. So you can identify, as a central government, it's very important to identify which region has the biggest gender gaps in green jobs and find a reason and then address tailored approach. So my answer to your question is really to look at not just average numbers, although statistics are very important and it's very difficult to get a subnational level data, but that's the area that we should really invest and to find a tailored support by regions.
I want to turn to the audience, but very quickly, Mr. Kiær, he mentioned your region in some of these statistics. Do any of these findings surprise you in any way?
Not really. It's good to have numbers to. So we are talking about facts, and not just attitudes. But it's not really that surprising to me, and I think we are talking a little bit on different perspectives, because my perspective is from a Nordic country, Denmark. We have a quite high equality. We have a flexible labor market. We have some good conditions for women to work. So it's the problems are much different where I come from and from my perspective than, of course, some of the perspective you are talking about in the region that we are placed right now. So it's a matter of perspective. But I think you are right on aiming at the gap in the specific regions and try to solve it more specifically.
The most immediate problem in your region that needs to be tackled?
I think we always talk about the Nordic countries as countries that are very equal and that we have equal opportunities as men and women. But it's not when you dive a little bit under, it's not that easy. And we also have, as I mentioned before, a lot of traditions and way of thinking about what kind of work you can have, which is, I believe, something we have to address regarding the green transition, because we actually need women to think broader. One of the things we're working with in the DI is we made some put some money in some campaigning, something we call Boss Ladies, for to address the issue that women can actually go into more skilled labor force, like electricians, and also try to make it more attractive for women earlier to work with science, technology, engineering, mathematics, so it's not just a man thing. So when we dive under in our regions, we also have issues to address. Absolutely.
Let me now turn to the audience here at this point. Any questions, please? Don't be shy. Don't be shy. We have the mic moving around throughout the audience. Very good. Okay, we have a question here at the front. Okay, we're waiting for the microphone. Yeah.
Thank you very much. You talked a lot about the care industry, but I wondered if there was an opportunity through the transition. I didn't want to steal their sunshine with my question. So I wondered if Just Transition couldn't be the moment where we could redesign some traditional male jobs. For example, I'm from the building trades, and by the introduction of new techniques, new materials, and new processes to build houses, we could maybe rethink the way that the building industry is seeing itself, to be less of a macho kingdom, and I wondered if that could be one of the challenges that we should address instead of simply abandoning in those industries.
Does anyone want to go for that? Redesigning the labor market to make sure that women can enter, that they feel comfortable, specifically in the building industry, right? The building sector.
Well, I can start. Yeah. I can start answering. Can I? Yes. So one thing that we know about training is that high-skilled workers, categorized like high-skilled workers, tend to take more trainings and given more learning opportunities, and medium to low skilled workers are either not willing to take those trainings, or like they are not given the opportunity to train or learn. That's why because green transition is really skill biased transition, you see, meaning that you need to learn something to upskill or reskill. So the opportunities and then also willingness is quite important. And then I wonder if when you say the building sector, if you're talking about like designers and also engineers, they are high skill jobs, exactly. So plumbers and the constructors, we need to really think, if they are given enough opportunities for learn and for, upskill and then being, transferred to a new type of jobs, because the market is also quite large and then also quite stable. in a sense that, there is a dynamic movement like renovation of buildings and so on, but they need skills, right? And in other places, we are discussing how to decarbonize buildings, and all discussions are around the shortage of skills of green building renovation. But workers are there, but actually they are not equipped with doing a little bit more higher skill job. So this gap has to be bridged.
Emma, I think she had something to say as well, right?
Yeah, I think I want also to touch upon, I think the questioner was also talking a little bit about like the cultural change in different sorts of sectors. And I think there's a really interesting feminist analysis that is about what's called petro-masculinity. The idea that there actually is quite a close relationship between our conception of being a real man and our production systems. So we see actually all over the world, women are more likely to be engaged in climate activism. Women are more likely to be engaged in, for example, caring about whether you sort your trash. Whereas men tend to be more engaged in actually a lot of polluting activities. And I think that certainly, and I really agree with the person asking the question, there is certainly like a really big opportunity for us to also talk about what is the dominant culture in these very male-dominated production sectors, both in building, but you could also talk about technology and production. So I think there's certainly an opportunity now to talk about what role does what type of work you have play for your gender identity. Because often we talk about gender identity in terms of trans people, but also a lot of cis people have gender identity and express their gender through their work. And I think what we're seeing right now, especially if you look at something like the yellow vests in France, there's also a sense that the green transition comes with a loss of identity because you are it's no longer possible for you to be engaged in the same sector. And your sector is not only relevant to your income, it's also to who you are. And I think we're really missing something about what is hindering the green transition if we're not also talking about the way we all need to update our identities and update the way we look at ourselves. And when it comes to that, I think some of the people who especially we need to be doing this work with, who need to be understood and seen, and who need to be taken into account, are the people who are losing a lot of identity through loss of a way of living that our economy has been conducive to for a long time, but that is no longer fit for purpose. And that goes both for what's happening in the agricultural sector, in the building sector. A lot of people are losing identity, and a lot of those people are men. And we also need to, in our activism, in our transition, think about that loss of sense of value and a sense of purpose. And I think that especially goes for a lot of men right now who are seeing a transition that essentially says that you are superfluous. We don't need your type of man anymore. And of course are reacting to that. And I think that's a huge cultural shift. We need to talk about how do we do that in a respectful but also transformative way. And I think it's a big hindrance. Culture also matters. I think what's the old saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast? I think culture also eats technology for breakfast. That if we don't have a cultural change that mirrors what the change we need in society, then the technology won't help and it won't be used if we're not taking it in and seeing ourselves in it.
Well, as a student of anthropology, I'm very interested in these cultural shifts that you're speaking about. But also you said something that deserves a follow-up. You said that men are involved in more polluting activities. Can you unpack that a bit further? And then I can see that, Emanuela, you're nodding to that. So I'm going to ask for you to share some insight after Emma's comments on that too.
Yeah, there are different ways. There are both the way that men are living and transporting themselves almost all over the world. Men are more likely to not use collective transport, to travel more for work, especially, of course, in the more high income parts of the world, but also are more engaged in production work, in producing things, producing new things. And if we're talking about a more sustainable way of living, we will also need to explore reproduction more actively, meaning producing less new things And I think men are very often engaged in sectors that are, I think we can't deny, are under threat right now. Also, we talk about the care economy. The reason that we're doing that is because a lot of women have jobs that are much less carbon intensive and much less use much fewer resources, so thus are less environmentally heavy. So I think certainly this also has to do with the way that we've, like, for example, in a country like Denmark, even though we are very gender equal in many ways, women have a high labor force participation, we also have an incredibly gender segregated labor market, actually almost the most gender segregated labor market in all of Europe. So if we don't see the gender dynamics of how different sectors are hit by climate change and green transitions, I think we're going to lose a lot of the anger and the frustration that it'll create, because I do think that a lot more men will be looking at updating their ways of working and will be looking at some sectors who might be eliminated altogether than women are.
Anyone like to add on to what she's just said? Yeah.
In some aspects that what you say, because it's true that traditionally men with these stereotypes, they were focused on, for example, on oil and gas industry. The majority are men, on coal, and now we are trying to move those workers from those polluter sectors to new technologies or green jobs or renewable energy. What happens is the majority, the critical mass are men, the ones that have been in jobs that were the responsibles of the situation that we are in this planet, not them, their job. And of course, at the moment that we establish job plans, or the companies or the governments, the first usually to be taken into account to have a new job in the renewables are men's, except that in certain countries there are already certain conditionalities. When companies want to go to the coal regions, for example, in the countries that are now at the forefront of this transformation, if you present a project in some of these countries, not in all, you need also to take into account the gender lens. Because if not, you will create again a demographic and unequal problem. I will put an example in the coal regions in Spain. To have a project, you present your offer. If you don't present a jobs plan with gender equality, gender balance, to offer the same number of jobs, not only to the miners that they have to lose their job, also the women that they have been working in the industry surrounding the mine, not inside the mine, because there were very few. This is a good opportunity, because there is a conditionality to receive the money of the funds of the Green Deal, the Green Funds, or the Just Transition Funds. You need to present a job plan. You need to commit on to create jobs in the region, not only for men, also for women. I think it's a solution.
To maybe repeat myself a little bit, that we shouldn't be too critical or to make it into a big problem that things are changing. I think we have to think of it as an opportunity and also we have to think that if you dig down pipes in the earth, it doesn't really matter whether it's oil pipes, gas pipes, or hydrogen pipes. You need someone to dig down pipes, and that is actually the problem, at least in the region where I'm from, that we need qualified people to do real work. And it's not a big threat for the labor market, because the demand is there, but we need employees to do the job. And now I'm talking about digging down pipes, just to to maybe a little bit, but the issue is real there. The demand is there, and so don't be too afraid of this transition. Just my point here.
Sorry, can you? Yeah. No, I was actually thinking that from my colleague from the OECD, you know, it's very important, this diagnostic tools where you actually look at the tasks and the gaps in terms of the presence of women and men, and therefore, you know, what can be done to close those gaps. Linking it also to the person in the audience that was asking about construction, and using the term redesigning. In the redesigning and reframing, we definitely need to have women to be part of the design, because that's where innovation comes from, and that's where you can keep identity, as Emma was saying, and this is where you can actually make a business case out of it. Just an example, which I think it was a project paid by one of the Nordic countries in Palestine, in Gaza in particular. We were working with women that were doing some kind of training on designing furniture, because there was a market for furniture. And we're talking on small scale, but the truth is that these women were able to completely shift the mind of the employers, the enterprises, because they saw that women, they were actually saying, well, kitchens needs to be bigger, because for us it's important the kitchen needs to be bigger. So they started to build bigger furniture, etc. So, you know, it was an added value that translated also into business. And to connect to what you were saying as well, I think it's very important the fact that we cannot lose the culture, the dignity element of jobs, because it is true that there are lots of jobs that in the past were considered, you know, very good jobs that now nobody wants to do, and the employers are desperate to find people, even in jobs, even when they give very good opportunities. In my country, for instance, which is Italy, now they cannot find people that want to work in agriculture. Nobody wants to work in agriculture because, you know, you have this idea that it's not a good job. While in reality, it's a very dignified job, and it can be also very well paid. So this idea of also rethinking about jobs and providing new dignity to a lot of these jobs, I think it's very important.
Sorry, I think it's important the anticipation, listening you and listening Emma, because if you say we precise workers that we don't have in X sectors, but you decide at the moment that you need, it's better to anticipate and to retrain or to prepare, to provide the skills to these workers. Of course, I know the Construction Federation, that is one of our members, is working on that, because now you can have more women in the construction sector, because through the technology, you don't need this physical component only. You need also brain. And that, I think, in that aspect, we are equal. And there are, but what this, always the problem is the lack of anticipation. Means now I need 300 workers on that sector, but I don't find. Why you don't prepare through the professional schools, through education systems, to prepare those workers when you will need, they will be in the labor market. Also, this segregation of the labor market in certain countries and in certain periods of our history were totally interested, because it was the mentality that women must be at home and not working. Now, hopefully that is changing in parts of the world, but it's necessary anticipation, breaking stereotypes, and also invest in education and skills.
We go back to the audience at this point. There's a question here. Yes.
What can we do to make the agriculture sector more desirable to work in?
I don't think I have the answer. It's a really big question, actually. But I think we have to think, that's one of my main points, actually, that we have to think of, especially with the region where I'm from, that we don't look down on real jobs. That is really, it's a necessity for the development, for the green transition, that we have people that are working in real jobs, also in agriculture. it's not something we should look down to. In Denmark, there's a little tendency to that we all have to be academics and we all have to be very well educated, which we have to, but we also need real workers, and that is something that we have to talk about. As not also with our kids. That is actually you can make a really good life in all kind of sectors, in construction, in agriculture, etc. But that is a Danish perspective, of course, or Nordic.
Just to clarify your question, did you mean making it attractive for the entire gender spectrum or just in general? The gender spectrum, okay. Because I would like to emphasize that in some regions, for example, my region in West Africa, women dominate agriculture. So let's keep that in mind. It looks very different across the world. Yeah.
In regions, as you say, women dominate agriculture, but we have a big problem here. There is a huge number of informality in the, and that is not attractive for a young woman that wants to have a career. Because it's an informal sector, you will not have social protection, you will not have the possibility to develop a career, even if you like. I will put an example. We have an affiliated in India, that is Siwa, that tries to organize informal workers, especially in the agriculture and in the mining industry. What they have done is, Siwa have done is to use the renewable energies, means to receive through projects funds from donors to build renewables in the agriculture sector to use to make more affordable, easy, efficient the work in the agriculture sector for women. And that is an experience that they have. And this organization gathers 1 million workers in India. Means if 1 million workers in India, women, SIBA is the name of the association, can do that, why not to expand the idea around the world?
That's very interesting. We have time for one more. Emma, yes, sorry. Emma, go ahead.
In terms of making agricultural work more attractive, I think like the lack of attractiveness in agriculture and the informality that is so heavily connected to agriculture, even in a rich country like Denmark, there's a lot of issues with informal workers in agriculture, is also something that's happened coherently with a lack of respect and intensification for food. That we spend much less money on food, a much smaller percentage of our income on food. We have become incredibly used to food being very, very cheap. It is created in very intensive processes. So I think about making agriculture more attractive is also about the revaluing of food systems. And that right now in many agricultural production processes, there is a disconnection with the land that makes it oftentimes a somewhat painful place to be, because even the people who have been in it for a long time, they're saying we're doing things too fast. We're not doing it with consideration for nature and the animals and the resources that we're using, because the pressure to produce is so intense, also because there is such a loss of food, like there's so much food is being wasted. So I think there's a big connection between the revaluing of food systems and the food that we eat and the revaluing of the people who produce the food, because it seems to me that culturally those two devaluations have happened at the same time.
Very interesting. So reconnecting with the land. Thank you so much for that. We have time for one more question from the audience before we round up here. Yes.
All right, thanks so much for the presentation to our panelists. I'm Chairman Mustafa. I'm from Africa, Liberia. And in Liberia, it's one of the most difficult things to see more women going into agriculture sector. We're not able to feed ourselves. Most of our rice, our staple food in Liberia is rice. Our rice come from India. Our rice come from in China. This movement will have already crisis in Liberia. It's a more difficult thing. So what can we do as a country to involve in agriculture sector, to encourage more women or more men to go agriculture sector, so that to minimize the food crisis in Liberia? Thank you ever so much.
Any lessons from the Nordic region? Who wants to tackle that one? Pretty much how to bring in and value local food systems in West Africa is what he's referring to. So valuing the local food chain, the value chain locally. Any observations, suggestions for the gentleman?
About agriculture, we need to differentiate between what is the artisanal, small productions that we need to give them value, especially the ecological agriculture, and there are the big producers that needs to be more regulated, because very often they extract a lot, but they don't return to the society or to the workers or to the villages the money that they are winning. Means that I think we will need to differentiate in the sector these two variants: the local producers that they respect the land, and the others that they extract the land all that they can, and after they go to another country.
Now, I would like to ask for closing reflections. If I can just go down the line here, what is the one solution that you would like to see implemented in your region when it comes to considering gender equality in this green transition? I'm going to start with you, Mr. Kiær.
I don't think there is one answer, but I think, first of all, don't be afraid of the green transition. It's an opportunity as much as a threat. We have seen it in Denmark many years now, that we have cities working in fishery, going into wind industry, going into hydrogen industry. Don't be afraid of it. It's and regarding equality, I think it's a big in Denmark. Companies has a big opportunity, but also a big task here to make it attractive in all kinds of working sectors, to make it attractive for women and men, for that case, to work in the different sectors. So don't go into a building construction and in a male culture with naked ladies on the walls. To stop doing that, make it attractive for both genders. And then I think that we also need some courage for companies to actually not just talking about it, but also doing concrete initiatives to make it more attractive. And here you have to work with your cultural and your bias. So, and maybe a fourth thing is to actually think of this as a long. It's not something you can fix in a short term. That you think of it as a cultural and you have to work with traditions and cultural bias, and think of it as a journey to something different. And it's something we all have a responsibility to work with. Yeah.
We should not be afraid to embark on the journey. Thank you for that challenge. And Emma, please.
Shortly, I think, yeah, like was just said, it's a multi-factor issue. But I think for me, we need to have new assessments of what we consider to be successful economics. I think we've touched upon it a little bit with the care work, but we have a huge issue with something like GDP, I feel, which is a useful number for some things, but also there is a lot of value that's constantly created in our society that is not being captured by that. And right now we need to look at what are ways that we can increase people's standard of living, value of life, no matter their gender, without it being necessarily dependent on an increased use of products or necessarily an increased income. For some people, their income needs to rise, but for others, maybe they could do with less. And I think looking at what do we perceive to be a valuable, meaningful, dignified life and working life, and how do we achieve that, also means measuring new things and asking ourselves, what does a good life for a regular middle-class person look like in 25 years? And I still think when it comes to questions like that, it's difficult not to get, like it was just said, bogged down by fear of what such life could look like. But I think that's really what we need to have something to strive towards, and also be excited about the opportunities that these transitions can give to our lives. I think for many, many people, the green transition will mean an extreme betterment of their conditions. And I think also that, there's a lot of value already that's not being counted, that if we saw that clearly, we would see that we are rich in ways that we don't even yet quite grasp.
Thank you so much. And Emanuela, the number one solution, the most immediate solution that you think needs to be implemented?
I think we really need to make sure that we understand just transition in a, not in a narrow way, but in a much broader way. And I agree with colleagues when they say that we shouldn't be afraid. There is a potential for amazing innovation, but it needs to go in the right direction, and the journey needs to be gender responsive and gender transformative. It has to be based on rights, on social protection, on dignity, on decent work for everyone. So I think this is the challenge that we have. Hoping that we can meet the 1.5 degree raise.
I share what my colleague says, that we need to always put on the table what is really just transition. Is a reduction of emissions, is a transformational phenomena, but we must not forget what is around the just transition, that is people, not only business, not only reduction of emissions, because a planet without people will not work. Also. But I must say that one of my first solutions will be to achieve, or at minimum to reduce, the gender pay gap, because that continues being a big problem. And during the pandemic, and maybe if we have another catastrophe, I don't want to be catastrophic, but we will see, the majority of the workers that they lose their job were women, because when you confront the option that you must care someone, usually is the one who have less income, and that usually are women. But one solution, reduce the gender pay gap.
Mr. Matsumoto?
Sure. Yeah, so we need to do two things. One is broadening employment in green task jobs. Green task job exists in every sector, not only what we call green sector, but we need to look at every sector. And as I mentioned today, my key message is really, the solution should be local. So the place-based approach is really important. And this place-based approach, we didn't discuss anything about the role of local government today, but I think it's quite important that, not only national or international, but the local government should play a role on that. So that's my 2 cents.
So much. Well, a round of applause to our esteemed panelists. This was amazing. I hope that this was as insightful for you all as it was for me. That was incredible. Well, the conversation continues tomorrow. I have this flyer here, Why Gender is Key to the Green Transition. It's happening tomorrow, so please try to make time, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. This event has come to an end. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.